Who is she? Filming a video and getting a video out? What? So, if you haven't noticed, I have kind of taken a break from my channel for the past few months. We had a hurricane come through late September, early October into South Carolina, and it was just a lot. We were out of power for like over a week, and we definitely did not suffer as much as other places like in South Carolina and North Carolina did, but thankfully we are doing good. And it's just been kind of crazy hectic with school and work, so I'm kind of just posting when I can and when I feel like it, or when I feel inspired or creative. And so I am on a Christmas break right now from school, which has been lovely, and I have wanted to get a video out. So here we are filming my best books of 2024. It's kind of crazy to think that 2024 is coming to an end, and kind of scary because this year just flew by and it's been so great and full of amazing reads. So I'm not going to do this like some people do where I list my top 10 or top 15 books. I know my absolute favorite book of the year, and the rest are all just favorites. They're like children to me. I just can't pick between them. They all are just getting a spot. So I'm actually going to go through my top 20 books of the year, and they're in no particular order until I get to the last one, which is my favorite book of 2024. So again, these are in no particular order. They are just the books that I had the most fun reading and had the best time with, and they're all very memorable in my mind and will be all-time favorites from here on out. So the first one is Where He Can't Find You by Darcy Coates. This was my first Darcy Coates book that I read, and it certainly did not disappoint. I have been told that if I love horror books that I need to read Darcy Coates, and this one was full of illustrations which were so creepy and just added to that horror element of the book. I also listened to the audio, which was really good. This one kind of reminded me of The Lovely Bones, where you have these kids that are being kidnapped and are missing, and the only people that are left to find these kids are like the family members or the people who care about them, because the cops are too afraid and don't really have the evidence to support who they think the murderer is. And there is this one creepy guy who everybody knows is creepy and everybody thinks has something to do with the kidnappings, and it just was very adventurous and creepy, and I just loved it. So I've already picked up more from Darcy Coates, but I will definitely be picking up more from her in the future. I feel like y'all already had to know that Abby Jimenez was going to make it on this list somehow, and just for the summer did exactly what it was supposed to do. This book she just never disappoints with her writing. I feel like I am not a huge romance reader, but there are just some authors who do it so well that I don't mind picking up stories from them, and Abby Jimenez is definitely one of those authors. She just created such likable characters, and I feel like this one she went the deepest with on her topics and subject matter, and it was just very heartwarming. I remember crying, I remember getting happy and getting mad and getting sad, and just when you can feel all of those kinds of feelings in a romance book, that's how you know that it's done well. And again, it's not just smut and it's not just romance and lovey-doveyness. Like, this was real life things that you would experience getting into a relationship. So again, she just makes it in my top books of the year every single year. Another author that I was not surprised at all made it into my top books of the year is Erin A. Craig. I read The 13th Child and absolutely loved it. I was looking forward to this as soon as my friend Hope said that I would like this book because of the gothic setting and just the imagery and vivid imagination that Erin A. Craig has and that she puts into her books. Just takes me into a whole nother world. I loved that we got kind of like a mythology aspects with having gods in this book, and again you have that kind of fairy tale reimagining, but it's a darker fairy tale, which I didn't think I would be into, but apparently I am. But this one also had some harder hitting subject matter that struck my heart and had me tearing up, and I was not expecting that with one of her books. And so just knowing that she can do so much at once, where she can make it kind of eerie and gothic, but also so heartwarming. That just shows the variety and the range that she has as an author. The next book on this list was a first time read for me for this author, and that was Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli, I think is how you say her name. She has written other books besides this one, but this was the first one that I heard from her, and I remember people ranting and raving about this one, and I just had to find out for myself what all the hype was about, and it was worth it. I love a good witch versus witch hunter series, and then if you're going to make it like a romance between a witch and a witch hunter, that just sells me completely on the book as a whole. And it was just so good because you get Regency vibes, but you also it kind of reminds me of Pride and Prejudice versus zombies in a different way. I also feel like she did a great job of having a love triangle in this book, because I am definitely not a love triangle person, don't really enjoy that, but this one I kind of did enjoy it, and I was pulling for a certain character, and I'm not going to say who, but the end of this book left my jaw on the floor and had me kind of enraged, I'm not gonna lie. So I am very excited to pick up the next one and see what's gonna happen. The next book that I was in love with, and that I am in love with, is probably not gonna come as a shock to most of you, but I don't even care. I don't care that this book has been labeled as overhyped. I really don't. It has so much in it, and I loved it, and I will continue to stand by this series and continue to read the series, and that is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. The first one was Fourth Wing, read it, ate it up, loved it. I was like, give me more dragons, which is exactly what I got in Iron Flame, was more dragons and a cliffhanger at the end that literally had me ready to just stare at the ceiling for the rest of my life until the next book comes out, and I'm still not over it. When you have an ending that is as memorable as this, and so many different parts in a book where I can just vividly imagine them now, you've won me over. You've sold me on it. So I will be buying the rest of the series, and I will be reading it, and it will probably stay in my top series because we have dragons, and I just can't get enough. I did not expect a lot of romance books to make it onto this list, but the fact that I have multiple of them was kind of wild to me. So the next one is the ROM Commers by Katherine Center. This was my first Katherine Center book that I have ever read. I actually went to a author event that they had at my local library where she was speaking, and she just sold me completely on this book. And so I went and I got my copy. I even bought more from her, and I'm just ready to dive into them. But I read this book and it immediately took me into the story, and I fell in love with the characters. A lot of people didn't really love Charlie, I believe is his first name. Yeah. A lot of people didn't really love Charlie in this book, but I just knew that he was like a quiet, brooding, grumpy guy for a reason. And again, we just get realistic characters with realistic stories in them, and I just, again, fell in love, swooned, cried, did all of the different emotions that I didn't think were possible to have reading a romance book. I, for one, am not surprised that this next book made the list because she is an all-time favorite author of mine, and that is Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. I absolutely love her books. They have a mystery thriller aspect as well as a magical realism, fantasy type of aspect, which is exactly what we're getting in this book. You have witches who are living on an island, and again, she just has a way of writing settings where I immediately get drawn in, and I felt like I flew through this book. I feel like I read it in like 2 sittings, and I was just so intrigued. She has a way of, even if she has unlikable characters, I still want to know what's going on. I still want more from them, and this book just had a mystery that ended in a way that I was not expecting, and I loved that. I also was just so happy with the ending and how it turned out, and I literally cannot describe just how much I get drawn into Adrienne Young's books. The next book has been on my TBR for so long, and I'm so glad that I finally picked it up, and so surprised that it actually made my top book of the year, or one of my top books of the year. And that is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerri Maniscalco. I feel like I compared this one a lot to Anatomy by Dana Schwab, and they are very similar in that you have two women who are, you know, wanting to get into the doctor field and wanting to examine like corpses and stuff, but in the time period that they're in, they obviously can't do that and it's frowned upon. But I just loved Audrey Rose and her character. I loved the mystery and how you kind of get a true crime element in there as well. And I also really enjoyed Thomas, who is the mailman character. He is just kind of reminiscent of Styles from Teen Wolf to me, with how he's just very sarcastic and very funny, but also can be very serious and knows like how to protect the people that he cares about. So I will definitely be continuing this series in the new year. Also, this is my video and I make the rules, so I'm not going to apologize for putting a bunch of series on there or sequels on there, because when they're done as well as they are, they're going to make my top list. So the next one is Foxglove by Adalyn Grace. I was looking forward to this one so much because I just needed more of Cigna in this book from the first book, and I wanted to see what was going to happen and go down in this one. And let me tell you, stuff went down. Things made me mad. I thought we were getting a certain trope that I do not like in here, and I was ready to throw hands and throw this book across the room. But not everything is as it seems, and that's all I'm going to say, because you need to pick this book up. If you like gothic Regency books that have a magic system in them, as well as like characters such as death and life, you need to get into these books. You need to do it. It's so good. They're so worth it. They're not overhyped. They're underhyped in my opinion, so let's hype them up even more. The next book I was shocked made my top list, but also not shocked. Kind of just surprised in a good way. And that is The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. This is a copy that I got from Owlcrate, but I fell in love with this book so much. It was so good. This is a cozy fantasy. It takes place on an island. I just love that we had characters like talking plants. We had characters who worked with these mer horses, which I need a mer horse. Even though I don't do water stuff, I need a mer horse. And we also had such a good slow burn romance in this as well, which I appreciate, because I feel like in cozy books you often get quick romances and it's just like kind of easy, but this one had more of a risk to it, a little bit more of a suspenseful nature in certain aspects, which I really enjoyed. So again, we have discovered that cozy fantasy is our favorite genre this year, and this definitely helped to prove that, because I just love cozy characters where, again, they are different. Like, we have orcs, we have talking plants, we have mer horses, we have regular people, and they just want to do things like make jam and make friends and live in little cottages, and that's what I want in life. You know, is that too much to ask? The next book was, again, another book that I was kind of surprised made my list, but not in a bad way, in the best way, and that is Happy Medium by Sarah Adler. This was my first book that I've read by Sarah Adler. She also wrote Mrs. Nash's Ashes, which I will definitely be picking up this coming year. This one was so cute. It was about a fake medium who scams people kind of to get money, but she has a lot of reasons why she does the job that she does, and she goes to meet this farmer to save his farm, and she finds out that she actually can see ghosts. And so again, we get a very slow burn between a grumpy sunshine kind of person and you have a ghost in the mix. So again, this book was way more emotional and way more in-depth than I thought it was going to be, and it just kind of reminded me of the way that Abby Jimenez writes, and I just flew through it. I didn't want to stop. I wanted more, and I just will never get over it. I'm the type of person to take off a dust jacket from a book and not put it back on that book and then not remember where I put the book. So that, I know that was a lot of information, but all of that to say that this next book that made my list was House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. There was no way I was going to read a Sarah J. Maas this year and not put it on my best books of the year. This one was so much information. You have to know that going into Crescent City, this is an urban epic fantasy book, and there's so many characters, so many different types of magic, so many worlds, so much going on, and I loved every minute of it from the moment I opened it until I finished it. I cannot talk enough about this one. She never fails. Sarah J. Maas never fails. You can never convince me that she's not the queen of fantasy, because she is. She just is. So if you haven't read this book by her, please get on the series. I promise. Read the first 100 pages of House of Earth and Blood, which is the first one in this series, and stick with it, and just know that by the time you get to this one, it will be totally worth it. Since I showed you guys that dust jacket, let me show you another dust jacket that doesn't have a book to go along with it, and that is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. We already knew this was going to go on there because Divine Rivals was one of my favorite books of 2024 or 2023. So reading this one in 2024 was the best conclusion that I needed for this book. But also, I still want more. Like, I need more Iris. I need more Roman. I just need more. I loved this one because we got more of the kind of gods aspect that you are wanting. I think from the first one, that's not a spoiler because in the first one you know that there are gods. But there was so much that went on in this book that I can't even comprehend. I never thought like historical fantasy was my kind of thing, but obviously from my list from this year, it's definitely something that I need to continue diving into. Okay, 2 books I read, but I do not physically own them. The first one is The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. This was my first book by Holly Jackson. I have not read the other books. I remember I tried reading A Good Girl's Guide to Murder at one point and just couldn't get into it. I did read that one this year and gave it 5 stars. Absolutely loved it. But Rachel Price, I loved even more. I absolutely love this. I highly recommend listening to the audiobook if you want to read it physically as well, to read alongside it, because it just entrances you. I loved not knowing what the heck was happening in this book. I didn't believe anyone. I didn't trust the narrator, didn't trust Rachel. I didn't trust anybody in this book. So I had no idea what was going to come of the ending, and I was not disappointed at all. I also love how this is kind of a podcasty element as well, and it just makes it to where you're never bored, and it doesn't feel like the same kind of mystery thriller books that you always pick up. The next book I read on my Kindle, and this just again proved to me that I do love cozy fantasy more than I thought, and that was Forged by Magic by Jenna Wolfhart. This one is the first in a series called Falling for Fables, and I absolutely love the series. Loved the second one too. I think I just loved the first one a little bit more. I can literally picture everything that went on in the first book from the very beginning to the very end and probably recite it for you so you wouldn't even have to read it yourself, but I'm not going to do that because you need to read it. You're following an orc and an elf or half elf, and there is like a competition on this secluded island, and there is kind of a high risk in this book going forward, and you are kind of a little worried. I was a little worried. It also has a little spice for those that enjoy that, so it kind of has everything for everyone. And I just am saying, if you've never read cozy fantasy before, this is the one to start with. The next book that is on my list is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I had a feeling I was going to enjoy this one, but I did not have a feeling that I was going to absolutely love it and have it be on my top favorites of the year. I was very shocked because, again, I am not that big of a Regency person. I've tried to get into shows, I've tried to get into other books, but they just don't do it for me. But this one did it. I immediately, when I finished this book, I went and got the second and third. I got another book by her, and I went ahead and ordered the novella as well. Apparently the way to get me to like Regency books is to put fairies in those books. I really felt like this is a cozy fantasy more than just a regular fantasy book. And again, you have that portal magic where you can get transported into another world, which I love. And I just ate it up. I can't wait to dive back into this series and see if I can get more. Like, I've heard that people who read the second book love it even more than the first one, and that's going to take a lot in my opinion. So I can't wait to see what Olivia Atwater does in that one. Okay, so I probably couldn't narrow down like, you know, a top 10 or top 15 or whatever, or even a top 5, because I just loved so many of these books, but I can definitely narrow down a top 3, and I'm going to give you my top 3 now. So in third place was A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. This was my first Danielle L. Jensen book, and again, already pre-ordered the second one, and I already went and bought 2 more in a different series from her, and I'm just fully obsessed. I knew going into this one that I was probably going to like it because it's Norse mythology, and you also have Vikings and Valhalla and shield maidens, so I just had the best time reading this. You definitely get those Vikings, shield maidens time of history in this book, again with characters who I loved, but again was kind of weary of. I don't know who I trust in this series yet, and I'm excited to see what she does going in the future. So again, already ordered the second one, really enjoyed. If you love the show Vikings, if you love mythology and fantasy, grab it. You will not be disappointed. My second favorite book of the year is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez. Again, my first book by Isabel Ibanez, and I absolutely loved it. I, again, did not know if I was going to love it as much as I did, because I've never read a book that is set in Egypt, and it kind of gave me Indiana Jones vibes, and you get a magic system into that as well, and you also have a romance that is set alongside it, with also questionable characters. Again, you don't really know who you are supposed to trust in this book. You have people turning on each other. You have a cliffhanger, crazy ending where my jaw was on the floor and I was just ready to chunk it across the room, but also just loved it so much that I wanted more immediately. So I will definitely be reading the sequel to this one and getting into that. But Isabel Ibanez has a way with words where she just, it feels like a movie is playing out in your head, and I don't think I've been able to envision a book as well as this one. And the best book that I read this year was A Feather So Black by Lyra Celine. This book, I will never stop raving about it. You kind of get a fairy world while also, I would say, getting a bit of mythology, Celtic mythology in it. You have magic, wooden, not even wooden, you have some wooden characters, but you get magical, mythological characters. We have fae in this book. We have a complex but very well done magic system. You also have kind of a love triangle going on, kind of a love square. I don't really know even how to explain it, but I fell in love with this book. If you follow me on Instagram, you will know that I'm trying to get everybody I know to read it, and everybody that I've gotten to read it has given it at least 4 stars or higher. So I will not stop raving about this book. I got approved for an ARC of the second one, and we'll be picking it up immediately in the new year. So please do me a favor and read this book, because it had every single thing that I've ever wanted in a fantasy ever. And I just need as many books on Celtic mythology / fae as possible, please, especially in a fantasy / romantasy world. That's how you win me over. So those are all the books that I read and loved in this year that has quickly come and gone. And thank you guys so much for sticking around even when I've been on this break, which I've really needed. And I'm just excited to be back to posting while I can. But hopefully we have some of the same reads maybe. If we have had some of the same favorite books, leave them down below. Or if you have a favorite book that I didn't mention in this list, leave it down in the comments as well, so that I can check it out and maybe put it on my best books for 2025 list. But again, thank you so much for sticking around and watching, and I will see you guys in my next video.